When I started getting into music production, I was excited to start messing around with all the wonderful plugins and instruments and synths and EQs and compressors that all the big name producers were talking about. But then I saw the prices. I then discovered the plethora of free plugins that are out there, and I wanted to see what I could produce using only free plugins. And so I'm going to break down my latest lo-fi track, which is called Finally Free, and I named it Finally Free for two reasons. The first reason is pretty obvious. I only use free plugins, free samples. Heck, the DAW that I used is Ableton Live Lite, which came free with my keyboard. And the second reason why I called it Finally Free? Well, stick around until the end of the video to find out. All right, I got Ableton Live Lite opened here, and for this track, the first thing that I did was record acoustic guitar. So that's what the raw sounded like, and the first plugin that I threw on was this compressor. This is the Red 3 compressor that came free with my Focusrite Solo interface. The next plugin that I used is what gives it the sauce, the lo-fi vibe. One of my favorite free plugins, and that's Origin by Cymatics. So you could hear what it's doing. It's making it sound like it's coming out of a record player or something like that, or it's supposed to sound vintage. And one thing that I do, because I work in Ableton Live Lite and I only have a maximum of 8 tracks, is I turn down the noise all the way down. And I know lo-fi is supposed to have vinyl crackle and all of this, all of this noise behind it, but I turn it all the way down for a reason, and I'll tell you why in a bit. The next one is another Cymatics plugin, which is Space Light, and it's a reverb plugin. This one is some very light reverb. Next, I got a saturator, warm-up highs. That's what it says. It's if you just type in warm-up highs, it is one of the presets in Ableton. And that's one thing that's great about Ableton. Like, it has this sort of search feature. In almost every track, I have a utility plugin. So when I'm mixing, I will set the level to what I want it to be overall. But then if I'm doing any automation, I prefer to actually automate the gain on the utility plugin instead of automating on the track itself. So let me show you quickly what I mean here. So I have this acoustic guitar track over here, and let's say I want to automate the volume. I go over here to the track volume, I right click and select show automation. And then let's just add some random automation here. Doesn't really matter. This is just an example. Now later on when you're mixing, let's say you want to adjust the volume for the entire track. Okay, well, you go to the track volume, and when you adjust the volume over here, you actually disable all of the automation that you did earlier. So let's right click and re-enable automation. So to adjust the volume for the entire track, just throw on a utility plugin and adjust the gain, and this will keep all the automation that you set earlier. Now let's say for some reason you're like, Tarosa, I want to do it my way. I want to adjust the track volume. Okay, well, there's a way to do that. In the automation lane, just click and select the entire track and hover the mouse so that the entire lane is blue. You got to make sure the entire lane is blue. And then you could adjust the volume from that point. I just find this way a little bit clunky. So next up, let's go over to keys. And I have Spitfire Labs on this. And man, I still don't understand how this plugin is free, because there are so many amazing sounds with this thing. It's pretty crazy. So the preset that I use is a tape piano magnetic reader. Oh, just already this sort of vintage vibe. In terms of EQ, I'm not a huge fan of the stock plugins that come with Ableton Live Lite, but honestly, Nova by Tokyo Dawn Records is an amazing EQ. Essentially, I'm just cutting off a lot of the low end, some of the high end. I know I'm going to be adding bass and other instruments, so I wanted to carve out some space for those instruments. It felt like I needed some more atmosphere to it. And so I duplicated the piano and I added another instance of Spitfire Labs. But for this one, I was using the Vintage Keys, the 73 preset. Right? When it comes to drums and percussion, I always want it to sound realistic, like an actual drummer is playing it. I always thought that the best drummers play exactly on time. They're exactly on the grid. But you know who plays exactly on time? Robots. The humanity is in the imperfections. As you can see here, I am using a bunch of Cymatics free samples. Man, Cymatics should be hooking me up here because I'm using all their plugins. I'm using all their samples. Hit me up, Cymatics. Usually what I'll do is just play the kick and the snare first all by itself and then layer on the different elements on top of it. This is what my drum rack sounds like. You can also see that these grayed out ones are actually samples that are not being heard. I think I was playing around with different sounds, different ideas, and the good thing about Ableton is that instead of deleting something outright, you could always just enable it or disable it, and it's super easy. All you do is press 0 on your number pad, turn it on and off. One thing that I do, if I zoom in all the way in on the MIDI track here, you can see that everything is a little bit off time. That's what I think gives it a realistic feel. So this is what we're working with right now. All right, one thing that I forgot to mention, on the drum rack, I have Cymatics, yet another Cymatics plugin. It's Cymatics Diablo Lite. It's the free version of this plugin. I just have some punch and some clip just to give it a little bit more, just a slight bit of, not too much, just a little bit of. All right, sounds like I'm taking a shit. For bass, the plugin that I use is the Martinic Key Bass. Eldre, who is one of the biggest lo-fi producers out there, he recommended this plugin.
Okay, right now, Keybase. It's a free plugin. It's called Keybase, K-E-E bass. Love that bass. I'm using that in 90% of my beats.
Just a super simple bass line, right? For this specific track, I am sidechaining the bass to the kick. And so essentially every time the kick is happening, the bass just ducks under it a little bit so that they're not fighting each other. The one thing that this plugin doesn't have is a way for you to slide between notes. So I just did it the old school way. Right? Works. Let's move on to the electric guitar part that I recorded. Okay, I lied. There's one paid plugin that I use in this entire thing. It is Bias Effects, which is an amp simulator. I don't have a nice guitar amp. I don't have a bunch of foot pedals for my guitar. And so I bought Bias Effects and it's been great. Now let's say you don't have an amp simulator plugin. If you type in clean guitar amp, you throw that on and you know, it sounds good. This is the stock preset from Ableton. This is the amp simulator plugin that I paid, I don't know, like $100 for. I have a compressor on here. I have Nova again, cutting off a lot of the low end, some of the highs. Oh, I also have another free plugin on here. It's called Fresh Air. And what it does is just adds a little bit of crispiness. For one part of the track, I wanted strings. I wanted to give it this nice, mellow vibe to it. And I wanted to make it sound like it was coming out of like a little record player or a tape cassette or something like that. So for strings, what I use is Spitfire Labs. I'm using the strings long preset. Whenever I hear orchestral string music, you know, it swells up, it swells down, you know, it just feels beautiful. And that's what makes it sound real. And so I tried to do my best with it here with the automation. It's kind of subtle there, but without the automation, it would just be straight. And that's not what I wanted. And to give it that lo-fi vibe, of course, you got to throw in Origin. Again, I turned down the noise all the way down. And I gave it some movement. That's gives it some wobble. So it kind of, you know, makes it sound imperfect, which is what I wanted. And this resampler, the big knob in the middle. So if it's all the way up here, that's essentially not cutting out much, if anything. And so to make it sound tinny, to make it sound like it's coming out of a record player, I brought it all the way down, about, I guess, halfway down, right? It's all the way up. But if it's all the way down, you know? So we're getting there. And I think I still needed to adjust the sound, so I threw in Nova on there to EQ it further. And as you can see here, I EQ'd the heck out of this thing. I really cut out almost everything except for this range here. Is that the right thing to do? I don't know, but that's the sound that I was going for, and so that's what I did. All right, now on the master. First of all, I have Restream on here, which sends all the audio coming out of Ableton to OBS, which allows you to see and hear everything that is going on in Ableton. And second, I have yet another instance of Origin by Cymatics. So on every other instance of Origin in this track, I had the noise level turned all the way down. And that's because I have it turned up here on the master. So it's only one instance of this noise vinyl sound. And when I first started off, I threw in Origin onto every track, and I was like, man, this thing is this super noisy. All I hear is vinyl cracking. And that sucked. So I figured that, you know what, I'll throw it onto the master and I'll keep all the other settings really low. This is all the way up just so that it's not really affecting any of the frequencies. But here is where we hear the vinyl and all the crackle noise. So after a little bit more mixing, this is what the track Finally Free sounds like. The point of this video is not for you to use the exact plugins and samples that I used. The point is to show you that you can create music and express yourself creatively using only free plugins. So if you want to create music, look into all the free plugins that are available and just start making music. So what was the second reason why I called my track Finally Free? Well, at the time of this video, it's been a month since I quit my job. So yeah, finally free.